15 years behind the wheel of a big rig, and I honestly thought I'd seen it all. Harsh weather that turned roads into skating rinks, drivers so aggressive they make your hair stand on end, and breakdowns in the middle of nowhere that test every ounce of your patience. But what happened to me on Interstate 40 in Arkansas 3 years ago? That still makes my hands tremble when I think about it. Some nights, I wake up drenched in a cold sweat, haunted by that voice on the CB radio, and just how incredibly close I came to a disaster I might not have walked away from. It was late October, around 2 a.m., and I was on a haul. Electronics from Little Rock bound for Oklahoma City. That stretch of I-40 through Arkansas can be eerily isolated at night, especially between Russellville and Fort Smith. Just endless dark forests on both sides of the highway, with maybe another truck passing in the opposite direction every 10 or 15 minutes. It's a kind of profound solitude most people never truly experience unless they drive for a living. I'd been on the road since 6 that morning, so fatigue was really starting to set in. My eyes were burning, and I was struggling to keep them open. I was about 40 miles outside Fort Smith when a voice crackled over the CB radio, Channel 19, the standard trucker channel. It was a woman's voice, absolutely terrified. "Please, somebody help me," she cried, her voice breaking with sobs. My car broke down, and I'm stuck on the side of the road. There's something wrong with my engine, and I can't get it started. I'm scared to death out here by myself. Please, if anyone can hear this, I need help. I have a daughter roughly her age, probably in her early 20s, and my heart immediately went out to her. I know all too well how dangerous it is for a young woman to be stranded alone on a dark highway in the middle of the night. I grabbed my CB handset and responded instantly. "This is Sooner Express, eastbound on I-40, I said, using my company handle. "I hear you, ma'am. What's your location?" "I can stop and assist." The relief in her voice was palpable, almost overwhelming. "Oh, thank God." "Thank you so much. I'm at mile marker 62, eastbound side. My hazard lights are on, but my phone's dead. I've been here for almost an hour." I was starting to think no one would ever stop. Mile marker 62 was only about 12 miles ahead, so I told her I'd be there in about 10 minutes. She thanked me profusely, probably 6 times, and I could hear her weeping with relief. I felt good about being able to help someone in need, just as other truckers had helped me over the years when I was in a jam. As I neared mile marker 62, I started slowing down, my eyes scanning the darkness for her hazard lights. I saw them flashing about a quarter mile ahead. A small car pulled onto the right shoulder. I activated my 4-ways and began to pull over behind her, leaving ample space for other traffic to see both of us. That's when I noticed something that made me pause. The car was positioned perfectly straight on the shoulder, not at an awkward angle as you'd expect from someone who limped off the road with engine trouble. The hazard lights were flashing, but they seemed too bright, too new. And most importantly, there was no steam or smoke rising from under the hood, which you'd normally see with an overheated engine. I sat in my cab for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Something felt profoundly off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Maybe I was just being paranoid from the late hour and fatigue. I picked up my CB again. "I'm the truck behind you with the flashers," I said. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Her voice returned immediately, but something had subtly changed. The crying was gone, replaced by a tone that sounded almost eager. "Yes, I'm fine now that you're here. Can you come up to my car? I think there might be something wrong with my engine belt." That was the exact moment I knew something was terribly wrong. No stranded motorist talks about engine belts at 2 a.m., especially not a young woman who had been crying with fear just minutes before. I looked more closely at the car ahead of me, and that's when I saw movement in the woods on the right side of the highway. There were at least 2 figures shifting between the trees, maybe more, trying to stay hidden but clearly getting closer to the road. My blood ran absolutely cold as I understood what was happening. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a setup. I grabbed my CB handset, but before I could say anything, the woman's voice came over the radio again. This time it was completely different. The scared, crying girl was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "Come on up here, driver. We know you can see us. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I slammed my truck into gear and floored the accelerator, merging back onto the highway as fast as 18 wheels and 40,000 pounds of cargo would allow. In my mirrors, I saw figures sprinting from the woods toward the road, but they were too late. I was already speeding away. My CB crackled to life again, but now it was a man's voice, furious and spewing profanity. He called me every name imaginable and made threats about what they'd do if they ever caught me. I switched to channel 17, a lesser-used channel, and started broadcasting to any other drivers in the area. This is Sooner Express, eastbound on I-40 near mile marker 62. There are people trying to ambush trucks at that location. Do not stop if you see a broken-down car with hazards flashing. Repeat, it is a trap, a voice immediately responded. It was another trucker sounding like an older guy. Copy that, Sooner Express? This is Maverick, westbound about 20 miles from your location. I'm calling the Arkansas State Police right now. Are you safe? I'm safe for now, I replied. But there were at least 3 or 4 people involved and they had CB equipment. They're probably still monitoring this channel. Sure enough, the angry voice reappeared on channel 19, making more threats and boasting that they knew these highways better than any police. The other trucker and I both switched to channel 17 and stayed in contact until we passed each other going in opposite directions. About 30 minutes later, I heard the Arkansas State Police on my CB asking for the driver who reported the attempted ambush. I identified myself and gave them my location. They told me units were responding to mile marker 62 and asked if I'd meet them at the next truck stop to give a statement. I met the troopers at a Flying J outside Fort Smith, and what they told me made my blood run cold all over again. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened on that stretch of highway. There had been 3 other incidents in the past 6 months, all involving fake breakdowns and CB radios used to lure truckers into stopping. In one case, a Tennessee driver was beaten and robbed after stopping to help what he thought was a stranded motorist. In another, a driver was lucky enough to become suspicious and drive away, just like I had. But the third case was the worst. A Missouri driver had simply vanished. His truck was found abandoned at mile marker 58, just 4 miles from where they'd tried to ambush me. The driver was never found. The troopers suspected this was the same group, and they'd likely moved their operation a few miles down the highway after the previous incidents made that area too hot. They were specifically targeting truckers because we often carry cash, expensive CB equipment, and sometimes valuable cargo. Plus, they knew truckers were more likely to stop and help someone in distress because that's just the code of the road, a brotherhood that relies on mutual assistance. When the troopers reached mile marker 62, the car was gone, and there was no sign of the ambushers. However, they did find tire tracks in the woods where vehicles had been hidden in cigarette butts, suggesting people had been waiting there for hours. I gave the troopers my statement and contact information, and they said they'd call if they needed anything else. As I walked back to my truck, one of the younger troopers pulled me aside. "You were smart to get out of there when you did," he said, his voice grim. "These people aren't just looking to rob trucks. Based on what happened to that Missouri driver, I think they're capable of a lot worse." I finished my run to Oklahoma City, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had almost happened. The scariest part was how utterly convincing that woman's voice had been at first. She sounded genuinely terrified and desperate. If I hadn't noticed the suspicious details about her car and the movement in the woods, I probably would have walked right into their trap, and my story might have ended very differently. Since that night, I've completely changed how I respond to calls for help on the CB radio. I still want to help people. That instinct is hardwired into me. But now I'm much more cautious. If someone claims to be broken down, I call the state police first and let them handle it. If it's a legitimate emergency, the police can get there faster than I can anyway. If it's a trap, then I've potentially saved another driver from falling victim. I also installed a dash camera system that records everything in front of and behind my truck, and I upgraded my CB radio to one that can record conversations. If something like this ever happens again, I want evidence the police can use. The Arkansas State Police never caught the people who tried to ambush me that night. About 6 months later, they called to say the incidents had stopped, so they suspected the group had either moved to a different area or been arrested for something else. But they warned me that there are probably other groups out there using similar tactics. That's the part that really gets to me. How many other fake breakdowns are happening on dark highways? How many other drivers have heard that same scared woman's voice over their CB radio only to drive into a trap? And how many drivers haven't been as lucky as I was to notice the warning signs in time? These days, when I pass mile marker 62 on I-40, I always slow down and scrutinize the woods on the right side of the highway. Sometimes I imagine I can still see shadows moving between the trees, waiting for the next trucker willing to stop and help a stranger in trouble. It's a terrible thing when your natural desire to help people, that fundamental decency, becomes something criminals can exploit. I still drive the same routes and monitor Channel 19 on my CB radio. But now, every time I hear someone calling for help, I recall that scared woman's voice and how quickly it shifted into something cold and threatening. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. And those people didn't just try to rob or hurt me. They stripped away my faith in the basic decency of people who need assistance on the highway. They stole a piece of my humanity, forcing me to view every plea for help with a layer of suspicion, knowing that beneath a tearful request might lie a sinister intent. It's a wound that never truly heals, a constant reminder that even the most altruistic acts can lead you into the darkest corners of human depravity, and that vigilance is now as essential as knowing how to handle a 12-speed transmission. I've been driving a truck for 12 years now, and in that time, I like to think I've hauled just about everything you could imagine. Furniture, electronics, food, heavy machinery, you name it. Most days, you know exactly what's in your trailer because you either watch it get loaded or you're handed detailed paperwork. But then there are times, especially with certain companies, when you get what we call a sealed load. The trailer is already loaded and locked when you pick it up, and you're not supposed to open it until you reach your destination. Usually it's just a common security measure to prevent theft or tampering. Nothing to worry about. I had always been perfectly fine with sealed loads before. But after what happened to me on Route 2 through northern Michigan 3 years ago, I swear I will never haul another mystery load as long as I live. It was the middle of February, and I was picking up a sealed trailer from a warehouse just outside Flint. The paperwork was incredibly vague, simply listing the cargo as biological specimens for research purposes. The destination was a laboratory in Houghton, way up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was going to be about a 6-hour drive through some pretty remote forest areas, but the pay was excellent, and honestly, I really needed the money. The warehouse itself was strange from the moment I arrived. It was situated far out in an industrial area that looked mostly abandoned, and the building itself resembled a bunker more than a normal freight facility. There were no visible windows, just imposing concrete walls and a few loading docks. The security was intense too. I had to show my ID at 2 different checkpoints, and they made me sign about 6 different forms before they would even let me near the trailer. The guys who eventually brought the trailer out were wearing full hazmat suits, which immediately put me on edge. I asked the supervisor what kind of biological specimens required that level of protection, but he just brushed me off, saying it was standard procedure and not to worry about it. The trailer was a standard 53-foot refrigerated unit, and they instructed me to maintain it at exactly 38° Durham during transport. They also gave me a special phone number to call if there were any issues with the refrigeration unit. Before I hooked up, I performed my usual pre-trip inspection. Everything looked normal from the outside. Good tires, working lights, proper seals on the doors. But as I got closer to the back, I caught a faint smell. It was subtle at first, but it instantly reminded me of the time my grandfather's hunting cabin lost power, and all the deer meat in his freezer went bad, a sickeningly sweet, rotten smell that made my stomach churn. I mentioned it to the supervisor, but he just shrugged, saying it was normal for this type of cargo, and that the refrigeration would keep it under control. I wasn't entirely satisfied with that answer, not by a long shot, but I had already signed the contracts and really needed the job. So, with a knot in my gut, I hooked up the trailer and began the 6-hour drive north. The first few hours went by without a hitch. I drove through Saginaw Bay City and then headed northwest on Route 10. The weather was typical for February in Michigan, overcast and cold, with patches of snow still clinging to the ground. The trailer was tracking well, and the refrigeration unit seemed to be maintaining the correct temperature. I had my CB radio on, listening to other drivers complain about road conditions and traffic, and for a while, everything felt perfectly normal. It was around 4:00 p.m. when I turned onto Route 2, heading west toward the Upper Peninsula. This is where the landscape truly transforms in Michigan. You leave behind the populated areas, the farms and small towns, and suddenly find yourself surrounded by dense forests that stretch for miles without a single building or sign of human life. In the winter, especially late in the day, it can be incredibly desolate and eerie, but I'd driven this route countless times before, so I wasn't particularly worried. About an hour after getting on Route 2, just as the sun was beginning its slow descent, I heard the first sound. It came from the trailer behind me, a kind of dull thumping noise, like something heavy had shifted and fallen over. This sometimes happens with poorly secured cargo, so I wasn't immediately alarmed. But then it happened again, and this time it sounded more deliberate, like something was hitting the trailer walls from the inside. I grabbed my CB radio and tried calling the special number they'd given me, but I couldn't get a signal. I was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but trees, and cell phone coverage in northern Michigan is notoriously spotty anyway. So I decided to pull over at the next rest area and try to find a payphone if I could. The thumping from the trailer continued as I drove, growing more frequent and more violent. It sounded like whatever was back there was getting agitated. I started to wonder if maybe they were transporting live animals instead of specimens, perhaps lab animals being moved from one research facility to another. That would explain the smell and the noise, and it would also explain why they were being so secretive about the cargo. I eventually found a small rest area about 10 miles down the road. It was just a gravel parking lot with a couple of picnic tables and an outhouse. No payphone in sight. Still, I desperately needed to stop and figure out what was going on in that trailer. The thumping had grown so loud that I was genuinely worried something might break loose and damage the refrigeration unit. I parked the truck and trailer at the far end of the rest area, as far away as possible from the few other cars that were there. It was getting dark fast and the temperature was dropping rapidly. I grabbed my flashlight and walked back to inspect the trailer. As I got closer, the smell hit me again, much stronger than before. It wasn't just the sweet, rotten smell I'd noticed at the warehouse. Now there was something else mixed in, something acrid that smelled like wet dog and ammonia. I walked along the side of the trailer, straining to hear any sounds from inside. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then, as I reached the back doors, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't thumping or banging. It was scratching, long, deliberate scratches like claws dragging across metal. The scratching came from multiple locations inside the trailer, and it was growing more frantic by the second. Whatever was in there wasn't just moving around randomly. It sounded like it was trying with all its might to get out. I put my ear against the trailer wall and could hear other sounds too. A strange clicking noise, and what sounded almost like whimpering or whining. I was starting to get seriously scared. This was absolutely not normal cargo behavior, and I was beginning to think I'd gotten involved in something illegal. Maybe they were smuggling exotic animals or, God forbid, something far, far worse. I decided right then that I would call the police as soon as I could find a phone signal. But as I started walking back toward my cab, the scratching suddenly stopped. The trailer went completely silent, and the sudden quiet was somehow even more frightening than the noise had been. I stood there in the growing darkness, listening to nothing but the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. That's when I noticed the smell was getting stronger, much stronger. And it wasn't just coming from the trailer anymore. It was all around me, thick and cloying, like whatever was inside had somehow gotten out. I spun around, shining my flashlight in all directions, but I couldn't see anything unusual. Just trees, patches of snow, and my truck parked about 50 feet away. I started walking quickly back to my cab, but I'd only gone about 20 feet when I heard a sound behind me that made me break into a full-out run. It was a deep, guttural noise, somewhere between a growl and a roar. It wasn't a sound any animal I knew could make, and it was undeniably coming from the direction of my trailer. I reached my truck and jumped into the cab, locking the doors behind me with trembling hands. My heart was pounding as I started the engine and jammed the truck into gear. I didn't even look back at the trailer as I pulled out of the rest area and tore back onto Route 2. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as humanly possible. For the next hour, I drove as fast as I dared on the dark, winding road. The trailer was completely quiet now. No thumping, no scratching, no sounds at all. But the smell was still there, a pungent, sickening stench seeping into the cab, even with all the windows closed and the air circulation turned off. It was getting so bad that I was starting to feel nauseous. I was about 30 miles from Houghton when I absolutely had to pull over again. The smell was making me dizzy, and I was afraid I was going to pass out behind the wheel. I found another rest area, this one with better lighting and a few other trucks already parked there. I figured I'd be safer around other people while I tried to figure out what the hell to do. I parked near the other trucks and got out to check the trailer again. The smell was overwhelming now, and I could immediately see why. There was some kind of dark liquid seeping out from under the trailer doors and pooling on the asphalt. In the dim light from the rest area lamps, it looked black, but when I shined my flashlight on it, I could see it was actually a horrifying dark red. That's when the awful realization hit me. I wasn't hauling biological specimens or lab animals. I was hauling something that had died during transport, and it was decomposing in that trailer, rotting away. The thought of what might be leaking out made me physically sick. I stumbled to the bushes and retched up everything in my stomach. When I came back to the truck, another driver was standing near my trailer. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, with a deeply concerned look on his face. "You got a problem there, son?" he asked, pointing at the dark liquid on the ground. "That doesn't look good at all." I told him I was hauling a sealed load and didn't know what was inside, but something had obviously gone terribly wrong. He took one look at the fluid, then shook his head slowly. "Son, I've been driving truck for 40 years, and I've seen just about everything. But I've never seen anything leak like that from a legitimate shipment. You need to call the authorities right now." He let me use his satellite phone to call the Michigan State Police. When I explained the situation to the dispatcher, she immediately told me to stay exactly where I was and, under no circumstances, to open the trailer. She said they were sending units from both the state police and the Department of Environmental Quality to investigate. The police arrived about 30 minutes later, followed quickly by what looked like a hazmat team. They made me park my truck about 100 yards away while they examined the trailer. I watched through binoculars as they donned full protective gear before cautiously approaching the back doors. When they finally opened the trailer, even from 100 yards away, I could see the hazmat team members recoil and step back quickly. Whatever was in there was bad enough that even professionals prepared for the worst were visibly shocked by it. They spent about 2 hours documenting everything and taking samples before they finally came over to talk to me. The state police detective who interviewed me wouldn't tell me exactly what they had found in the trailer, but he did confirm that it was not biological specimens for research. He said it appeared to be the remains of multiple large animals that had been illegally slaughtered and were being transported without proper permits or refrigeration. He also mentioned that the company that had hired me was under investigation for several other violations. But what really bothered me, what kept me up at night, was what he said about the scratches on the inside of the trailer walls. He told me they looked fresh, like they had been made during transport. But if the animals were already dead when they loaded the trailer, how in God's name could they have made those scratches? When I asked him about this, he just gave me a blank stare and said the investigation was ongoing and he couldn't discuss the details. I never did find out what was truly in that trailer, and I never got paid for the job either. The company mysteriously disappeared a few weeks after the incident, vanished without a trace. The detective told me they were probably part of some kind of illegal wildlife trafficking operation, a nasty business. But that explanation doesn't account for the terrifying sounds I heard, or those fresh, desperate scratches, or why whatever was in there seemed to be trying so desperately to get out. I quit that trucking company the very next day and found a job with a firm that only hauls legitimate, meticulously documented cargo. I will never ever take another sealed load, no matter how much money they offer me. The nightmares I had for months after that incident, the cold sweats and the lingering dread, were not worth any amount of pay. Sometimes late at night when I'm driving through remote areas, the darkness pressing in, I still think about what might have been in that trailer. Were they truly just dead animals? Or was something still alive when I picked up that load, something horribly trapped and terrified? And if they were alive, what truly happened to them during those 6 hours on the road, slowly succumbing to whatever fate awaited them? The scratching sounds I heard will haunt me for the rest of my life, a chilling reminder of the unknown horrors that can lurk just beyond a locked door. Every now and then, I feel an inexplicable shiver, a fleeting sensation of a presence watching me, a faint echo of that putrid smell. And I pray with every fiber of my being that I never find out what was making them, because some mysteries are better left unsolved, buried deep in the desolate Michigan wilderness. I've been driving a truck for 10 years now, and you'd think I'd know every single truck stop, rest area, and fuel station between Atlanta and Savannah. Highway 80 is practically my second home. I've driven it maybe 200 times over the years. That's why what happened to me last October still makes absolutely no sense, and frankly, it still gives me cold sweats when I let myself think about it too much. That day, I was hauling a load of paper products from a mill outside Macon down to the port in Savannah. It should have been a routine run, one I'd done dozens of times, usually taking around 4 hours. But this particular day felt cursed right from the start. I got a late start because of problems at the loading dock, then ran into construction delays that seemed to stretch for miles. And to top it all off, my truck started having electrical issues, causing my dashboard lights to flicker on and off like a faulty Christmas tree. By the time I reached the halfway point, it was almost 11 at night, and I was running dangerously low on fuel. My gauge showed less than a quarter tank, and I knew there was no way I'd make it to Savannah without stopping. The real problem was that most truck stops along that stretch closed their fuel islands at midnight, and I was cutting it pretty close. My heart was really starting to pound with worry about finding an open station. That's when I saw the exit sign. It read, Truck Plaza, 24 hours, with an arrow pointing right. I had never, ever noticed that exit before, which was incredibly strange considering how many times I'd driven this route. But I was desperate, so I took the exit and followed the signs down a narrow 2-lane road that wound through thick pine woods. About 2 miles in, the truck stop appeared. My first thought was sheer relief. Finally, a place to fuel up. It looked like a decent-sized place with maybe 20 parking spots and what seemed like a full-service restaurant attached to the main building. Several other trucks were already parked, and I could see lights on in the restaurant windows. Everything looked normal enough, even welcoming. I pulled up to the fuel island and shut off my engine. The pumps looked a little older than what I was used to, but they appeared to be working fine. I got out of my cab and walked over to the building to prepay for my fuel, as most places require after midnight for security reasons. Stepping inside, though, was when I first started to notice something was truly off. The decor looked like it hadn't been updated since, well, maybe the 1970s wood-paneled walls, orange shag carpet, and those old-fashioned cash registers with big, clunky buttons and mechanical number displays. Behind the counter was a middle-aged woman with a towering beehive hairdo and makeup that looked straight out of an old movie. "Evening. Honey," she said with a smile that seemed genuine enough, but somehow out of place. "What can I do for you?" I told her I needed to fill up my tanks and asked if I could pay with my company credit card. She took the card, turning it over in her hands and examining it closely as if she'd never seen one before. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but we only take cash," she said. "There's an ATM over by the restaurant if you need to get some money." This struck me as incredibly odd. Every truck stop in America takes credit cards, especially company fuel cards, but I needed the fuel, so I walked over to the ATM. It was one of those ancient machines with a tiny green screen and buttons that looked like they'd been installed sometime in the 1980s. When I put my card in, it made strange beeping noises, but eventually, thankfully, dispensed the cash I needed. I paid for the fuel and went back out to pump it into my tanks. While I was filling up, I looked around at the other trucks parked there. That's when I noticed something else strange, something that sent a shiver down my spine. All the trucks looked old. Not just well-maintained older models, but truly old, like trucks from the 1970s and 1980s that you'd normally only see at truck shows or in museums. One was a 1979 Peterbilt with that distinctive old-style cab and gleaming chrome exhaust stacks. Another was a Kenworth from the early 80s with the kind of elaborate paint job you simply never see anymore. Every single truck had CB antennas and accessories that looked decades old. It was like walking into a truck stop from 40 years in the past. I finished fueling and decided to go into the restaurant for a quick cup of coffee before getting back on the road. The inside of the restaurant was an even bigger time capsule than the main building. Bright red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner playing songs from the 1970s, and waitresses wearing uniforms with little white aprons that seemed straight out of a diner movie. The menu was handwritten on a chalkboard, and the prices were ridiculously low. Coffee was 50 cents, hamburgers were $2, and pie was $1.50. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee from a waitress who looked to be in her 30s but wore her hair and makeup in a style from decades ago. As I looked around the restaurant, I realized all the other customers looked the same way. Men wore trucker caps and shirts with logos from companies I was pretty sure had gone out of business years ago. Women had big teased hair and clothes that screamed a different era. The conversations I overheard were even stranger. They were talking about fuel prices that made no sense, complaining about paying 80 cents a gallon when I had just paid over $3. They discussed CB radio channels and trucking regulations I had never heard of in my life. One man was talking about a load he was hauling to a company I knew for certain had been bought out and renamed in the 1990s. I started to feel seriously uncomfortable, like I had accidentally walked into some kind of bizarre historical reenactment or theme restaurant. But everyone was acting completely normal, as if there was absolutely nothing unusual about the situation at all. When I tried to pay for my coffee with modern bills, the waitress looked at them strangely and asked if I had anything smaller. I left a $5 bill on the counter, which seemed to satisfy her, and practically ran for the door. As I was leaving, I heard one of the truck drivers at a booth say something that made my blood run cold. "That new girl sure is dressed funny," he said to his companion. "Look at them clothes she's wearing. And that truck of hers, I've never seen anything like it." They were talking about me. My truck is a 2019 Freightliner, which is modern but certainly not unheard of. And my clothes were just jeans and a company shirt, nothing that should have attracted attention. But apparently, in this place, I was the one who looked utterly out of place. I walked quickly back to my truck, wanting to get out of there as fast as humanly possible. But as I was doing my pre-trip inspection before leaving, one of the other drivers approached me. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and a trucker cap with a patch from a company I didn't recognize. "That's a real nice rig you got there," he said, walking around my truck and examining it closely. "What year is that Freightliner?" "I've never seen one with all them fancy electronics and such." I told him it was a 2019 model, and he looked at me like I was completely insane. "2019? He said, laughing. "Come on now, girl. Quit pulling my leg. It's only 1983. They don't make trucks like this yet." For 14 years, the hum of my big rig has been my constant companion on the open road. And in all that time, my CB radio has been my window to the world, or at least to the world of other truckers. I've heard it all. The grumbles about traffic jams, urgent whispers about speed traps, warnings of treacherous weather ahead, and just the easygoing chatter that helps pass those endless, solitary hours. The CB for us, it's more than just a radio. It's a lifeline, a comfort, a way to feel connected when you're hundreds of miles from anything familiar. But what unfolded 2 years ago on Interstate 94 in North Dakota shattered that sense of connection, twisting it into something chilling. That's when I learned that sometimes the voice on the other end of the line isn't one you ever want to hear again. I was hauling a load of farm equipment, making my usual run from Bismarck to Minneapolis. It's a stretch of highway that cuts right through some of the most desolate, isolated country you'll find in America. Interstate 94 across North Dakota is mostly just a long, straight ribbon of asphalt winding through seemingly endless fields of wheat and corn. You might spot a farmhouse or a lonely grain elevator every 10 or 15 miles, but that's about it. During harvest season, in September, there's some life out there. Tractors moving, combines roaring. But this was late November. Everything was dead and brown, frozen under a heavy, gray sky that promised snow any minute. I'd been driving since early morning, and by the time I hit Jamestown, roughly the halfway point, darkness was already settling in. The weather was turning nasty too. A biting cold wind was starting to buffet my trailer, and the first few hesitant snowflakes began to tap against my windshield. I had my CB tuned to channel 19, hoping to catch some chatter about road conditions ahead, when a voice cut through the static, instantly making my gut clench with discomfort. Well, the voice drawled, and even through the crackle, I could practically hear the sneer. "Look what we got here, Montana Rick, eastbound in that pretty blue Peterbilt. How you doing tonight, Rick?" My heart did a little jump. The voice knew my handle and the color of my truck. That meant whoever it was, they could see me.
I quickly checked my mirrors, scanning the road.
Just a few cars and one other truck a good half-mile behind. I grabbed my microphone, trying to keep my voice even. "This is Montana Rick. Who am I talking to?" There was a pause, then a laugh that felt like ice running down my spine. "You don't need to know who I am, Rick, but I know all about you. I know you're hauling John Deere equipment to Minneapolis. I know you live in Billings with your wife Sandra and your 2 kids. I know you drive the same route about twice a month. I've been watching you for a while now. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't friendly CB banter. This was something far more sinister. This was someone who had been observing me, learning my habits, gathering information about my family. I forced myself to respond, my voice a little tighter than I wanted it to be. I think you've got me confused with someone else, friend. I don't know what you're talking about. The laugh came again, nastier this time. Oh, I got the right guy, Rick. I know exactly who you are, and I know exactly where you are right now. Mile marker 258 eastbound on I-94. You just passed that grain elevator about 3 miles back. Your truck is looking a little dirty, Rick. When was the last time you washed it? I glanced at my odometer, a sudden icy dread washing over me. He was spot on about my location. And yes, my truck was indeed grimy from some construction zones earlier that day. There was no doubt. Whoever this was, he was watching me at this very moment. I grabbed the CB again, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. Look, I don't know who you are or what you want, but you need to stop this right now. You're making me extremely uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? The voice was pure mockery now. You haven't seen uncomfortable yet, Rick. I'm just getting started. You see, I've been following truckers like you for months now, learning about them, studying their habits, figuring out the best ways to get to them. And you, Rick, you've become my favorite. I was frantically checking my mirrors again, trying to pinpoint which vehicle this lunatic was in. The truck behind me was too distant for him to read my license plate or company name. A couple of cars could have been tailing me, but on a straight stretch of highway like I-94, anyone with a good set of binoculars could be watching from a mile away. What do you want from me? I demanded into the CB. I want you to be afraid, Rick. I want you to know that someone is watching you. Someone who knows where you live and where your family lives. I want you to understand that you are not safe out there on that highway. And neither are Sandra and the kids back home in Billings. The mention of my wife and children by name, said with such malicious intent, made my blood boil. This psychopath was threatening my family. I gripped the CB microphone so hard my knuckles went white. You stay away from my family, you sick freak. I'm calling the police right now. Go ahead and call them, Rick. Tell them some voice on the CB radio is scaring you. See how seriously they take it. Besides, what are they going to do? I could be in any one of these vehicles around you, or I could be 10 miles away with a good radio setup. You'll never find me. He was right, and we both knew it. A CB radio, under ideal conditions, has a range of several miles. Someone with a powerful base station or a souped-up mobile unit could be anywhere within a fairly large area. Even if the police took my complaint seriously, tracking down an anonymous voice on a CB would be nearly impossible. But I tried anyway. I dialed 911 on my cell phone and explained the terrifying situation to the North Dakota State Patrol dispatcher. She was sympathetic, but she told me exactly what I'd expected to hear. Without a license plate number or a specific description of the vehicle, there was nothing they could do. She advised me to change to a different CB channel and to avoid using my handle or giving out any personal information. I switched to channel 17, but within 5 minutes, the voice was back. Channel 17. Now, Rick, you think that's going to help? I told you I've been studying you. I know all your habits. You always switch to 17 when 19 gets too crowded. You're so predictable. This was getting worse by the minute. Not only was this person following me tonight, but he had evidently been monitoring my CB conversations for weeks, even months. He knew my patterns, my routes, my family details, probably everything about my life. I tried switching to channel 21, then 12, then 6. Each time, within a few minutes, the voice would find me again. He was scanning the channels, listening for my voice, and he seemed to have all the time in the world to devote to tormenting me. You can't hide from me. Rick, he sneered when he found me on channel 6. I know every frequency you use. I've been recording your conversations for months. I know about that load of electronics you hauled to Denver last month. I know about the speeding ticket you got in Wyoming. I know about that truck stop waitress in Iowa that you've been flirting with. That last comment hit me like a physical blow. It was true. There was a waitress at a Flying J in Iowa I'd been friendly with on my runs through there. Maybe a little too friendly for a married man. It was nothing serious, just harmless flirting, but it was something I was deeply ashamed of and something I had absolutely never told anyone about. The fact that this stalker knew about it meant he had been watching me far, far more closely than I had ever dared to imagine. You're starting to understand now, aren't you, Rick? The voice continued, savoring my terror. "I know everything about you. Your roots, your schedule, your habits, your secrets. And now I'm going to start using that information. What do you want from me?" I asked again. But this time, my voice was unmistakably shaking. "I want you to suffer, Rick. I want you to be afraid every time you get in that truck. I want you to wonder if tonight is the night I decide to pay a visit to Sandra and the kids. I want you to understand that someone out there hates you enough to destroy your life." "Why?" I pleaded. "What did I do to you?" There was a long, chilling pause. And when the voice came back, it was different. Quieter, more personal, filled with a raw, burning rage. "You killed my brother." I felt like I had been struck by lightning. "I never killed anyone!" "You've got the wrong person. Route 2 in Montana, 18 months ago. You were westbound. My brother was eastbound on his motorcycle. You crossed the center line to avoid a deer and hit him head on. Remember now, Rick?" The accident came flooding back to me with a horrifying clarity. It had been during a terrible storm, heavy rain, poor visibility. A deer had leaped out in front of my truck, and I had swerved violently to avoid it. I remembered feeling an impact, a jolt, and stopping to check. But when I got out, there was no deer and no visible damage to my truck. I thought I had missed it, and the sound had just been my imagination, the trauma of the near miss. I had never seen a motorcycle, never seen another vehicle at all. I never saw a motorcycle. I choked into the CB. I never knew I hit anyone. "Of course you didn't stop," the voice snarled, laced with pure venom. "You just kept driving, left my brother dying on the side of the road in the rain. It took the police 3 hours to find him, and by then it was too late. But they found paint chips from your truck on his bike and tire tracks that matched your rig. They had your license number, Rick." My hands were shaky. I left long-haul trucking 6 months after the trial, trading the open road for a local job driving for a construction company. I miss the freedom of the highway sometimes, but I don't miss the gnawing fear that someone might be watching me, following me, learning everything about my life, just so they could use it against me. The worst part is the chilling realization that there are probably other Robert Kowalskis out there, nursing grudges against drivers for real or imagined wrongs, planning their own campaigns of terror and revenge. The CB radio, which used to connect us to other drivers and make us feel less alone on the highway, had become a weapon that someone could use to reach into our lives and utterly destroy them. That's the real horror of what happened to me. It was not just the threats or the stalking. It was the realization that the very technology that makes trucking bearable can also make it terrifying. Even now, years later, the echo of that voice still sometimes finds its way into my quiet moments. The fear, though dulled, never truly vanishes. It taught me that home isn't just a place, but a feeling of security, and that feeling can be utterly shattered by a determined, twisted mind. The open road, which once felt like freedom, now carries a lingering shadow. Every time I get into a truck, a tiny part of me scans the horizon, wondering, watching. The joy of simple solitude, the easy companionship of the CB, those have been replaced by a cautious vigilance. It's a heavy burden, living with the knowledge that someone out there believes you took a life, even if unintentionally. And the chilling truth is, while Robert Kowalski is behind bars, the world is full of unspoken grievances, of people nursing their pain and seeking their own brand of justice. It's a stark reminder that in our increasingly connected world, the very tools designed to bring us closer can, in the wrong hands, become instruments of profound terror and isolation, leaving scars that run far deeper than any physical injury, permanently altering one's sense of safety and trust in the world. For 11 years, I'd driven my rig across this country, navigating countless warehouses, loading docks, and industrial sites, from the sprawling distribution centers of retail giants to the humble, converted barns of family businesses. I truly believed I'd seen every type of pickup and delivery imaginable. But what unfolded at an industrial facility outside Bakersfield 3 years ago still twists my dreams into nightmares. It taught me that some cargo, some experiences are best left untouched, and some horrors should never be transported by anyone. It was late October, and I had just finished dropping off a load of agricultural equipment at a farm near Fresno when my dispatcher called. The offer was tempting, a pickup that very evening, promising double my usual pay for a similar run. With my daughter's college tuition looming, I couldn't say no, even if it meant driving through the night. The pickup location was listed as Kern Valley Industrial Storage, an address about 30 miles southeast of Bakersfield. I'd never heard of it, but that wasn't unusual. New warehouses pop up all the time in California. The paperwork claimed I'd be hauling processed agricultural products to a facility in Phoenix, which sounded routine enough. I pulled up to the address around 11:10 p.m., expecting a brightly lit industrial complex, bustling with activity. Instead, my headlights cut through the darkness to reveal a narrow dirt track leading to an isolated, dilapidated warehouse surrounded by empty fields. The building itself looked forgotten, rust streaking its corrugated metal siding, weeds pushing through cracks in the neglected parking lot. There were no company signs, just a small, nondescript placard by the entrance, KVI Storage. 2 pickup trucks and a large refrigerated trailer, looking like it had been there for ages, were the only other vehicles. A single dim floodlight cast long, eerie shadows across the loading dock where several figures moved. A cold unease began to settle in my gut, but I'd driven all this way and I needed that money, so I backed my trailer up to the dock and went to find whoever was in charge. The men working the dock weren't like the usual warehouse crew. They wore dark clothing and heavy work gloves despite the mild night. Not one of them met my gaze. When I asked who to check in with, they merely pointed toward a small windowless office tacked onto the side of the warehouse. The office was even stranger than the loading area. It was furnished with old metal desks and filing cabinets that looked like they'd been salvaged from a 1970s government surplus sale. The walls were covered with charts and diagrams I couldn't make any sense of. Behind the main desk sat a thin, nervous-looking man in his 50s who introduced himself as Mr. Patterson. He shoved several documents at me, but every time I tried to read them carefully, he'd rush me, insisting they had to finish the load before morning. "What exactly am I hauling?" I asked, the vague paperwork still bothering me. "Processed meat products," he rattled off without looking up from his clipboard. "Specialty items for restaurants in Phoenix. Nothing you need to worry about." I asked to see the load before they sealed the trailer, standard practice for most drivers. But Mr. Patterson flatly refused, citing health department regulations. He assured me everything was properly packaged and temperature controlled, adding that I just needed to maintain the refrigeration at 35 degrees during transport. While we spoke, I began to hear sounds from the warehouse that didn't fit a meat processing operation. There was a lot of heavy mechanical noise, like machinery running full tilt, but also other, more unsettling sounds I couldn't place, scraping, thumping, and what sounded chillingly like muffled voices or even cries. When I questioned Mr. Patterson about the noise, he just shrugged, claiming they were working on multiple orders and that the equipment could get loud at night. The loading process dragged on for about 2 hours, which felt excessive for a single trailer. I waited in the office, growing increasingly uneasy. I noticed 2 things in particular. First, a strong chemical smell hung in the air, like bleach mixed with something organic and deeply unpleasant. Second, the workers kept disappearing into a section of the warehouse cordoned off by heavy plastic sheeting, where I could hear different machinery running. Most disturbing were the phone calls Mr. Patterson received. He'd answer in a hushed voice, having brief, cryptic conversations using terms I didn't understand. I heard him say things like, "Processing complete on batch 7. Disposal truck. Arrives at 3, and sanitization of area 4 needed before morning." These did not sound like normal business conversations for a food processing facility. Around 1 a.m., the workers finished, and Mr. Patterson had me sign the final paperwork. As I walked back to my truck, I passed close to that plastic sheeting. Through a slight gap, I caught a glimpse into the forbidden room beyond, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Under bright lights were several large metal tables, and on them lay what looked like body parts. Not animal parts, as you'd expect in a meat plant, but human limbs and torsos. People in surgical scrubs moved around the tables, surrounded by medical instruments and containers brimming with organs. A sickening realization washed over me. I was staring at an illegal organ harvesting operation. I tried to act normal, my heart hammering against my ribs as I returned to my truck. My hands shook as I started the engine. The workers sealed my trailer, handed me the documentation, and I drove away as quickly as I could without appearing suspicious. But as soon as the facility was out of sight, I pulled over and called 911. The Kern County Sheriff's Department dispatcher listened intently to my frantic report. She took me seriously, but advised me to continue my delivery as planned. They didn't want to alert the criminals that they'd been discovered. Detectives, she assured me, would meet me at a truck stop outside Barstow to examine the cargo and coordinate with law enforcement in Arizona. The next 4 hours were the longest of my life. I drove through the night, a chilling charnel house on wheels, knowing my trailer was loaded with evidence of human butchery and likely human remains. The refrigeration unit dutifully kept the trailer at the required temperature, and the thought of what I was keeping cold back there made me want to vomit. Every time I glanced in my mirrors and saw that dark box behind me, a wave of nausea washed over me. True to their word, detectives met me at the truck stop, accompanied by a team from the coroner's office and several FBI agents. When they opened my trailer, even these experienced law enforcement professionals were visibly shaken. The trailer was packed with coolers and containers, and inside were human organs, tissue samples, and body parts, meticulously harvested and packaged for transport. According to the FBI agent who interviewed me, I had stumbled into a large-scale illegal organ trafficking network. The Bakersfield warehouse was one of several facilities where they were murdering victims for their organs, processing them, and shipping them to buyers. Across the country, my truck, it turned out, was being used to transport harvested organs to a medical facility in Phoenix. A willing partner in this horrifying criminal enterprise. The investigation sparked by my report led to the arrest of over 20 individuals across California, Arizona, and Nevada. The facility where I'd picked up the load was raided the very next day, revealing evidence of dozens of victims, homeless people, undocumented immigrants, other vulnerable individuals who wouldn't be missed if they vanished. What haunted me most was learning this wasn't the first time they had used my trucking company to transport their gruesome cargo. The FBI told me they'd been hiring independent drivers for months to move their processed meat products. And I was just the first driver who happened to see something I shouldn't have. Other drivers, they speculated, had probably transported similar loads without ever knowing the true nature of their freight. The psychological impact of that night has never left me. For months, I'd wake in cold sweats. Those metal tables and figures in scrubs burned into my mind. I still wonder about the victims whose remains I unknowingly transported, whether their families ever found closure. I felt complicit, an unwitting cog in their machinery of death, even though I hadn't known. I took a 6-month leave from trucking after the trial, which saw several defendants convicted and sentenced to life in prison. When I finally returned to work, I changed companies and now only haul for customers I know personally. I refuse any pickup involving refrigerated cargo, processed food products, or unfamiliar facilities. The worst part is the chilling certainty that other operations like this are still out there, using legitimate truckers to transport their illegal cargo. Every time I see a driver picking up a sealed load from an unfamiliar warehouse, I can't help but wonder if they know what they're truly hauling. These criminal organizations are sophisticated enough to make everything look legitimate, and most drivers would never have any reason to suspect the horrific truth in their trailers. I still have nightmares about that warehouse in Bakersfield, the plastic sheeting, the gleaming metal tables, the incessant hum of machinery in the dead of night. But mostly I dream about the victims, the people who died so their organs could be harvested and sold for profit. I carry the weight of their memory every time I get behind the wheel. The FBI agent told me my report saved lives by shutting down the network before it could claim more victims. He said I should be proud of doing the right thing, even though it put me in danger. But it's hard to feel proud when you know you were an unwitting participant in something so profoundly evil. This experience taught me that there are horrors in this world most people never see. That evil can easily hide behind the facade of legitimate business. It taught me that as truck drivers, we have a responsibility to pay attention, to question what we are hauling and where we are picking it up. Most importantly, it taught me that if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. And it is always better to walk away from a job than to become part of something that will haunt you for the rest of your life. I will never forget the faces of those workers at the loading dock, the sickening smell of that warehouse, or the terrifying sight of what lay on those metal tables. But I will also never forget that sometimes one person's willingness to speak up can stop something terrible from continuing. The victims of that organ trafficking network deserve justice, and I'm glad I was able to help them get it, even though the cost to my own peace of mind has been enormous. The road can be a dangerous place for truck drivers, but the real danger isn't always other vehicles or bad weather. Sometimes the real danger is the cargo we agree to haul and the people who hire us to haul it, lurking just beneath the surface of routine, waiting to shatter your world. The silence of the night, the anonymity of the highway, can be a perfect cloak for the most heinous crimes, and it makes you question how many unspoken tragedies pass us by, day in and day out, hidden in plain sight. I've been driving my truck through the Appalachian Mountains for 9 long years, and in all that time I truly thought I knew every winding road, every treacherous mountain pass, and every secret shortcut West Virginia had to offer. These mountains, they can be a real beast to navigate, especially when the weather turns foul. But there's an undeniable beauty to them that keeps drawing me back year after year. But what happened to me on one particularly thick, foggy night in November 2 years ago now shattered everything I thought I knew. It showed me there are roads in these mountains that don't exist on any map, places that defy logic and reason, existing in a way that just shouldn't be possible. That night, I was hauling a load of furniture from a factory in Martinsburg all the way to a distribution center in Charleston. It was a run I'd done 50 times, maybe more. A routine 3-hour drive, usually just following Interstate 81 south, then hopping onto Interstate 64 west, right through the heart of the mountain region. But from the moment I left the loading dock, everything just went sideways. First, there was a massive accident on I-81, traffic backed up for miles. Then, further down the line, construction on I-64 forced all the trucks onto a detour, adding another hour to my already delayed schedule. By the time I was finally getting close to Charleston, it was pushing midnight, and I was running seriously behind. To top it all off, a dense, soupy fog had rolled in, cutting visibility down to maybe 20 feet in front of my headlights. It was a white-knuckle drive. I was relying on my GPS to guide me through this unfamiliar detour when suddenly it chirped. Take the next right turn to stay on the fastest route to your destination. I peered through the fog, and there it was, a turn onto a road I had never, ever noticed before, despite having driven this area countless times. It was a narrow 2-lane mountain road with no street signs or route markers visible in the swirling mist. Something about that road felt profoundly wrong from the second I turned onto it. The pavement looked ancient, far older than anything you'd expect on a state highway, riddled with deep cracks and potholes, clearly hadn't seen maintenance in decades. There were no guardrails along the edges, which was terrifying, especially as we were undeniably climbing higher into the mountains where the drop-offs could be lethal. Most unnerving of all, though, was the utter lack of any other vehicles. Even on a remote back road at midnight, that was just strange. The fog just seemed to get thicker the higher I climbed, until I could barely make out the edge of the pavement in my headlights. My GPS, meanwhile, was still insisting I was on the correct route, but the estimated time to my destination kept jumping around wildly. 30 minutes, then an hour and 15, then 45. The system seemed as lost and confused as I was about where this road was actually taking me. After about 20 minutes of this eerie drive, I started to see lights flickering through the fog ahead. My first thought was relief, other traffic finally. But as I got closer, I realized the lights weren't moving. They were stationary, coming from buildings, and as I crested a small hill, the fog momentarily thinned, and I found myself staring down at what appeared to be a small mountain town nestled in a valley below. The town was unlike anything I had ever seen in West Virginia. The buildings looked ancient, like something pulled straight from the early 1900s, with wooden storefronts and houses that seemed to be illuminated by the soft glow of gas lamps, not electric lights. And strangest of all, there were people milling about on the streets, even though it was well past midnight. I could even make out horse-drawn wagons parked alongside what looked like very old automobiles. My immediate thought was that I'd somehow stumbled onto the set of a historical movie or some kind of elaborate living history museum. But as I slowly drove down the main street, the realization dawned on me. This was no movie set. The people were going about their everyday business, entering and leaving shops, chatting on street corners, and not one of them even glanced up at my modern truck as it rumbled through their quiet town. It was as if my vehicle, and indeed myself, were completely invisible to them. I pulled over at what looked like a gas station, hoping to ask for directions and get my bearings. The building itself was a relic, straight out of the 1920s, complete with old-fashioned gas pumps and a sign proudly advertising gasoline for a staggering 12 cents a gallon. A man in overalls and a cloth cap emerged to greet me, and when he spoke, his accent was utterly unlike any I'd ever heard in modern West Virginia. "Evening, stranger," he said, looking up at my cab with an almost childlike curiosity. "That's quite a machine you've got there. What kind of engine does it run on?" I told him it was a diesel truck, and he just stared at me, utterly confused, as if he'd never heard the word diesel in his life. When I asked him what town this was and how I could get back to Interstate 64, he scratched his head. "Never heard of any Interstate 64, he replied, a frown creasing his brow. "This here is Millbrook. Been here all my life, and there ain't no interstate road anywhere around these parts. You must be lost, son." Then I asked him the question that made my blood run cold. "What year is it?" His expression shifted from confusion to genuine concern. "Why, it's 1923, of course." "Are you feeling all right, mister? You look a bit peaked." My heart hammered against my ribs. The terrible realization hit me like a physical blow. Somehow I had driven my 2020 Kenworth into a town that existed in 1923. I scanned the street again. Everyone was dressed in period clothing. The cars were Model T Fords and other early 20th century vehicles. The architecture, the gas street lamps, even the very smell of the air was from a different era. I thanked the man, my voice barely a whisper, and scrambled back into my truck as fast as I could. I needed to get out of there, back to my own time, back to the real world. But as I tried to drive back up the hill the way I'd come, I found the road was blocked. People stood across the street, and they didn't look friendly. They were pointing at my truck, murmuring to each other in voices too low for me to catch. Then, an older man in a black suit and hat approached my driver's side window. When I rolled it down, his eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to see right through me, into my very soul. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it resonated with a chilling authority. "This is not your time, and this is not your place. But now that you are here, you cannot leave." "What do you mean I cannot leave?" I managed to ask, trying desperately to keep my voice steady, to hide the tremor of fear that was seizing me. "The road only goes one way for people like you," he answered, his gaze unwavering. "You can go deeper into our world, but you cannot go back to yours. That is the price of traveling on roads that do not exist in your time." I checked my mirrors, and my stomach dropped. More people had gathered behind my truck, not overtly threatening, but forming an unmistakable barrier. I was trapped in a town from 1923 with no way back. The old man in the black suit tapped on my window again, his movements slow and deliberate. "There is a way out," he conceded, his voice softer now, almost enticing. "But you have to follow the rules. You have to become one of us. Give up your old life and stay here forever. Or you can try to find the other road, the one that leads out of our time. But most people who try that road are never seen again." My gaze followed his pointing finger towards the far end of town, where the street dissolved into the thick fog and darkness. "That way leads to places that are worse than here," he warned. "Places where time does not work at all, where people get lost between the years and wander forever. But it is your choice." I knew with every fiber of my being that I couldn't stay in 1923, no matter how real and strangely captivating this place seemed. I had a family waiting for me in 2022, a job, a whole life I needed to return to. So, with a nod of thanks to the old man, I put my truck in gear and drove towards the far end of town, towards the road he had so grimly warned me about. The people of Millbrook watched me go, but they made no move to stop me. As I reached the edge of town, I glanced back and saw them all standing in the street, a collective expression of sadness and disappointment on their faces, as if they had truly hoped I would choose to remain with them. The road leading out of town was even more bewildering than the one that had brought me there. It twisted and turned in ways that defied all logic, sometimes climbing so steeply uphill I worried about my engine, and other times dropping so sharply I feared my brakes wouldn't hold. The fog was an impenetrable curtain, allowing me to see nothing beyond the immediate glow of my headlights, and my GPS had completely given up, a blank screen reflecting my growing panic. I drove for what felt like endless hours, though my clock was behaving erratically, sometimes jumping forward by 30 minutes, then inexplicably going backward. I passed through other small communities, each seemingly from a different era. One looked like a frontier town straight out of the 1800s, with wooden sidewalks and hitching posts. Another appeared more modern, but all the cars were gleaming models from the 1950s. In each place, people would emerge to stare at my truck and wave, but I never stopped. I was gripped by the terrifying fear that if I paused again, I would become trapped in another time period, forever lost, never finding my way home. Finally, After a nightmarish journey through this landscape of displaced time and impossible geography, I saw something that ignited a flicker of hope within me. Modern road signs began to appear ahead, and the pavement beneath my wheels felt new and well-maintained. As I rounded a familiar curve, I saw the unmistakable green signs of Interstate 64, and a wave of profound relief washed over me. I was back. I was in the real world. I pulled over at the very first truck stop I found, shaking uncontrollably, and called my dispatcher to let him know I was all right. I had been missing for over 12 hours, and the GPS tracking system on my truck had shown me in an area where no roads existed. Search and rescue teams had been out looking for me. Fearing I'd driven off a cliff or gotten hopelessly stuck in some remote wilderness, I tried. God knows I tried to explain what had happened. But no one believed me. They thought the stress of driving in heavy fog had caused me to hallucinate, or perhaps I'd suffered some kind of mental breakdown. The company sent me to a doctor who, after a thorough examination, found absolutely nothing physically wrong with me, but strongly recommended I take some time off to recover from whatever I had experienced. I never found any record of a town called Millbrook in West Virginia, nor any coherent explanation for how I had vanished for half a day while supposedly driving on roads that simply didn't exist. The specific GPS route that had led me to that initial mountain road was no longer in the system, completely vanished. And when I tried to retrace my path a few weeks later, my heart pounding with a desperate need for answers, I couldn't for the life of me find the turnoff that had initiated the whole nightmare. But I know what I experienced was real. I know with chilling certainty that there are roads hidden deep within these mountains that connect to places and times that should not, by any stretch of our understanding, exist. I know there are communities of people living in the past, trapped in their own time periods, forever hoping that lost travelers like me will choose to stay with them. Since that night, I've become much more careful about which routes I take through the mountains. I stick rigidly to the main highways and avoid any detours or shortcuts my GPS might suggest, no matter how efficient it claims to be. I always carry paper maps in my truck as a backup, a tangible reminder of the world I understand, and I absolutely never drive alone through remote areas at night anymore. Other drivers, usually older, more seasoned folks, have told me similar, whispered stories, tales of getting lost on roads that don't appear on any map, or finding themselves in places that seem to exist just outside the normal flow of time. Most people, of course, dismiss these stories as mere folklore, the ramblings of overtired minds, or the product of isolation. But I know better. I know there are profound mysteries in these mountains that we simply don't understand, and roads that lead to destinations that should be utterly impossible. The most frightening part of it all isn't just the memory of what happened to me, but the gnawing uncertainty. How many other drivers have taken those impossible roads and never found their way back? How many truckers have disappeared into these mountains, officially listed as missing persons, but are actually trapped in some other time or place, living lives they never chose? How many are still out there driving those twisting, time-defying roads, endlessly searching for a way home that may no longer exist? I still drive through West Virginia. It's my job, my livelihood, the way I provide for my family. But every single time I see the fog begin to roll in over the mountain peaks, every time my GPS suggests an unfamiliar route, I remember that old man in the black suit and his chilling warning about roads that only go one way. I remember the impossible choice he offered me, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had chosen to stay in Millbrook, forever lost in 1923, sometimes late at night when I'm driving through the mountains, battling the loneliness and the vast darkness. I think I can almost see faint lights in the distance, lights that don't belong to any town that exists on modern maps. And I wonder if, somewhere out there, in a place that exists between yesterday and today, the people of Millbrook are still waiting, patiently, for another lost traveler to find their way home. The mountains hold their secrets tight, and I can't shake the feeling that they're always watching, always waiting to offer that impossible choice again. I've been driving a truck for 7 years now, and in all that time, I'd never once questioned the legitimacy of an official Department of Transportation, DOT, way station. When those big signs command, all trucks must stop, you stop. When an officer signals you to pull over for an inspection, you comply. It's simply part of the job. And yes, it can be inconvenient. sometimes even costly if violations are found, but you respect the authority behind it. These inspections, after all, are crucial for keeping dangerous trucks off our roads. However, what happened to me at a remote weigh station on Highway 97 in Oregon last year shattered that trust, showing me that not everyone wearing a DOT uniform holds genuine authority, and some inspections have nothing to do with truck safety at all. I was hauling a load of lumber from a mill outside Bend to a construction company in Sacramento, a route that winds through some of the Pacific Northwest's most isolated and breathtaking country. Highway 97 cuts north and south through central Oregon, with long stretches where you might not see another vehicle for 20 or even 30 minutes. The landscape is high desert, juniper trees and sagebrush stretching endlessly in every direction. It's the kind of place where you can truly savor the isolation and the unique freedom of the trucking life. It was around 9 at night in early December, and I'd been on the road since noon. The weather was clear and cold, with a new moon making the desert darkness almost absolute, save for my headlights cutting through it. I was perhaps 40 miles south of Bend when I spotted the familiar signs for a mandatory weigh station ahead. I'd driven this route 20 times, maybe more, but I couldn't recall ever seeing a weigh station in this particular location. Typically, DOT stations are situated closer to major cities or at state borders, not in the middle of nowhere. Yet the signs looked utterly official, standard DOT logos, the familiar "all commercial vehicles must stop" mandate. As I drew closer, I could clearly see the weigh station building and the scale platforms brightly lit by floodlights. A couple of other trucks were already there, and I could make out figures in what appeared to be DOT uniforms moving around the facility. Everything seemed normal, legitimate. I pulled my rig onto the scale, waiting for the signal to proceed to the inspection area. A man in a DOT jacket, clipboard in hand, approached my truck. He looked professional enough with the standard uniform and equipment I was accustomed to seeing at weigh stations. He instructed me to park in Bay 3 and bring my logbook and vehicle registration to the office for inspection. The office itself was a temporary-looking structure, more akin to a construction trailer than the permanent facilities you typically find at weigh stations. Inside, several men wore DOT uniforms, but something felt off about them. They lacked the professional demeanor of real DOT officers, and they seemed far more interested in my cargo en route than my driving hours or vehicle maintenance records. "What exactly are you hauling?" one of them asked, despite my bill of lading clearly stating lumber products. I told him it was construction lumber, and he pressed further, asking where I'd loaded it and where I was delivering it. These were unusual questions for a DOT inspection, which usually zeroes in on driver qualifications, hours of service, and vehicle safety, not cargo specifics. Still, I answered honestly, figuring they might be conducting some kind of special investigation. Another officer quizzed me about my route, whether I made this run regularly, what days of the week I typically traveled this highway, and if I ever carried different types of cargo. Again, these felt like strange questions for a routine inspection, but I cooperated, as I truly had nothing to hide. The inspection of my truck dragged on for much longer than normal. A typical DOT inspection usually takes 30 to 45 minutes, but these men spent over 2 hours going through my vehicle. They seemed particularly fixated on my sleeper berth and the storage compartments, rummaging through my personal belongings with an excessive intensity. They also spent a considerable amount of time examining the lumber in my trailer, measuring boards, and taking photographs. What truly began to gnaw at me was their communication. Real DOT officers are usually very professional and systematic, but these men were whispering amongst themselves, making phone calls in voices too low for me to discern. At one point I saw one speaking into a radio, but his words sounded like coded language, not the standard terminology law enforcement uses. Around midnight, one of the officers informed me that they needed to conduct a more detailed inspection of my cargo, meaning I'd have to wait while they unloaded and examined every single piece of lumber in my trailer. This was highly unusual. DOT inspections rarely involve unloading cargo unless there's a specific, urgent safety concern. I asked to see their supervisor, but they curtly told me he wasn't available, and I had no choice but to comply. As they began unloading my trailer, several things solidified my growing suspicion. First, there were no other DOT vehicles at the facility, which was odd since weigh stations typically have at least one official patrol car on site. Second, the equipment they were using to move my lumber looked more like standard construction gear than the specialized tools DOT inspectors normally employ. Most importantly, I could see into their office building, and there were no computers or official DOT forms visible, just some basic furniture and communication equipment. It was then that the cold dread began to set in, and I knew I needed to call for help. I walked back to my truck to grab my cell phone, but when I tried to make a call, I discovered there was no signal. While not uncommon in rural areas, it felt like an incredibly convenient coincidence that the cell towers were down at this precise location. I then tried my CB radio, but I couldn't raise any other drivers on the normal channels. As I wrestled with what to do, I overheard a conversation between two of the fake officers that sent a shiver down my spine. They were discussing processing the current load and preparing the cargo for transfer. One of them mentioned the buyers in California and the usual pickup point near the border. The horrifying realization hit me. These weren't DOT inspectors at all. They were cargo thieves who had set up a sophisticated fake weigh station to steal valuable loads from unsuspecting trucks. But then it got infinitely worse. Listening more carefully, I heard them discussing the driver situation and disposal protocols. My blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to steal my lumber. They were planning to get rid of me, a witness. I heard one of them chillingly remark that they had handled 3 drivers already this month and that the desert is a good place to make people disappear. My heart pounded against my ribs as I grasped the horrific truth. I wasn't dealing with simple cargo theft. These were murderers who had killed other truck drivers and were planning to do the same to me. I scanned the facility, and for the first time I noticed several pieces of heavy equipment parked behind the building, including a backhoe, a machine perfectly capable of digging graves in the desert. I knew I had to escape, but my truck was blocked by their equipment, and there were at least 4 armed men in the facility. I decided on a desperate gamble. I walked back to the office claiming I felt sick and needed to use the bathroom. They directed me to a portable toilet behind the building, which gave me a crucial opportunity to glimpse more of their operation. What I saw behind that building will haunt me forever. There were 3 trucks parked there with out-of-state license plates, all apparently abandoned. One of them had damage to the driver's side door that looked horrifyingly like bullet holes. Near the trucks were several large plastic tarps spread on the ground, and I could see dark, disturbing stains that I was terrified to identify. I also noticed a radio setup far more sophisticated than anything you'd find at a legitimate weigh station. They had equipment for monitoring CB radio traffic and what looked like radio jammers, designed to block cell phone signals. This was a meticulously planned operation, designed not just to intercept and rob trucks, but almost certainly to eliminate any witnesses. I knew I had only minutes before they finished unloading my truck and decided my fate. I slipped back to my cab and started the engine as quietly as I could. The keys were still in the ignition, and miraculously, the engine turned over on the first try. I slammed the truck into gear and drove straight through the fence at the back of the facility, crashing through the chain link and racing across the desert. Behind me, I heard shouting and the roar of vehicles starting up. In my mirrors, I could see headlights bobbing wildly as they pursued me, bouncing and lurching across the rough desert terrain. My truck wasn't built for off-road driving, but adrenaline and sheer desperation kept me pushing forward through the sagebrush and rocky ground. I drove cross-country for about 20 minutes, following what seemed to be an old mining road until I finally reached Highway 97, roughly 5 miles south of where that fake weigh station had been. I flagged down the first vehicle I saw, which by some miracle happened to be an Oregon State Police patrol car, and I told the trooper everything. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, dozens of law enforcement vehicles converged on the area. FBI agents, Oregon State Police, local sheriff's deputies. But when they reached the location where the weigh station had been, they found nothing. The buildings were gone. The equipment was gone. There was no sign that anything had ever been there except for some tire tracks and the gaping hole in the fence where I had made my escape. However, they did find evidence that chillingly confirmed my story. 3 abandoned trucks were hidden in a ravine about 2 miles from the weigh station location, and all 3 drivers were listed as missing persons. The subsequent investigation revealed that the trucks had been stolen and the drivers had apparently been murdered, just as I had overheard those fake officers planning to do to me. The FBI told me that my life was likely spared by the simple fact that lumber isn't as valuable as some other types of cargo. They were taking their time deciding if it was worth the risk of murder. If I had been hauling electronics or pharmaceuticals, they probably would have killed me immediately and vanished with the goods. The investigation led to the arrest of 7 people involved in the hijacking ring, including 2 former DOT employees who had provided them with official uniforms and equipment. They were also linked to similar operations in Nevada and California, and the FBI estimated they had stolen millions of dollars worth of cargo and brutally murdered at least 12 truck drivers over a 2-year period. During the trial, I learned more horrifying details about their operation, making me realize just how close I'd come to death. They had been monitoring CB radio traffic to identify valuable loads, then setting up these fake weigh stations at strategic locations to intercept specific trucks. They possessed sophisticated equipment for jamming cell phone signals and radios, and elaborate contingency plans for disposing of drivers and vehicles in remote desert locations. That experience fundamentally altered my entire approach to trucking. I now carry multiple communication devices, including a satellite phone that local radio equipment cannot jam. I have detailed maps of all official weigh stations on my regular routes, and if I encounter one not on my maps, I drive right past it and immediately report the location to authorities. I also installed a GPS tracking system that automatically updates my location every few minutes, ensuring that if something ever happens to me again, law enforcement will know exactly where to look. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts. If something feels wrong about an official stop or inspection, it probably is wrong. Real DOT officers follow standard procedures and ask standard questions. If someone claiming to be a DOT officer starts asking unusual questions about cargo or routes, or if the facility doesn't look like other weigh stations you've seen, it is far better to be suspicious and wrong than to be trusting and dead. The worst part of the whole ordeal is knowing that there are likely other criminal organizations out there using similar insidious tactics. How many truck drivers have vanished on remote highways, officially listed as missing persons, but were in fact murdered by hijackers posing as law enforcement? How many fake weigh stations and inspection points are operating right now, patiently waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to stop? This chilling reality haunts me, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of those of us who spend our lives on the open road. It's a psychological burden to constantly second-guess every flashing light, every roadside encounter, every uniform you see. The industry needs to wake up and do more to educate drivers about these evolving threats, to provide clear guidelines for identifying legitimate law enforcement facilities versus cunning deceptions. We need a unified front against these predators who prey on our trust and dedication. I still drive Highway 97 regularly, but I'm infinitely more careful about where I stop and who I trust. Every time I see a weigh station sign, I verify it against my maps. Every time I interact with someone claiming to be a DOT officer, I scrutinize their questions and procedures. And every time I drive past that desolate section of desert where the fake weigh station once stood, I vividly remember how terrifyingly close I came to becoming another missing person statistic. The road can indeed be a dangerous place, but the real danger isn't always other drivers or mechanical failures. Sometimes the true peril comes from people who expertly weaponize our inherent trust in authority and our willingness to follow the rules against us. That is a gut-wrenching lesson every truck driver needs to learn before it's tragically too late.